Hello and welcome to the February edition of the Organic Gardening Podcast. I'm Fiona Taylor, and in a moment I'll be joined by Chris Collins and Dr. Anton Rosenfeld. February is a month of preparation and anticipation in the garden. While growth is slow, there's still plenty we can be doing to set ourselves up for the season ahead. It's a good time to reflect on what worked last year and what didn't, and how we can apply those lessons as we move towards spring. Later on, Garden Organic's head gardener, Emma O'Neill, speaks to Harry Kelsey from WildWater about how ponds support biodiversity. There'll be some practical advice on creating a garden pond, choosing the right location, and how to keep your pond healthy. We'll answer your questions on the pros and cons of comfrey tea, composting kitchen waste in the winter, and what to plant under fruit trees. But now it's time to catch up with Chris in our virtual potting shed. Hello, Chris. Great to see you.
Hi, Fiona. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. Getting ready for spring.
Oh, yes. Anticipation is starting to set in, I believe.
It really is. I mean, you get through that kind of those dark days of January and then you kind of get into February and it's just starting to get a bit lighter, isn't it? It just makes such a difference.
I think psychologically the extension of the day makes a big difference. And also I think just the excitement, you're kind of ignoring the dreich, that's a good word, the Scottish
great word.
days, because you know that things are going to start changing and the spring's not far away.
Yeah, absolutely. And you spent a lot of time last year coming up to Ryton, where we're based, and doing a huge amount of filming. It was a big project. You're fronting a terrific training course for us, aren't you, Chris? You want to just tell us a bit about that?
Well, this is going to be a certificate in organic growing. I'm very excited about this. So this will be basically the very basics, really. In a way, if you're starting out in horticulture or you're just interested, you want to get the basics, and it comes from all people from all over the organisation. It's been really nice collating, getting things, putting everything together and putting them in this order to teach what we often talk about.
I mean, the thing about organic growing is it's the original principles from which a lot of modern advice is now descended from, if you like. People are talking about all sorts of issues these days as commonplace, soil health, for example, creating your own liquid feeds, not buying in fertilizer, not using pesticides, and how to look after your garden in a way that also looks after nature. It's all very much part of the general conversation these days. It's kind of expected, but it's all really derives from organic gardening principles. And so actually for anyone who's perhaps an early professional gardener, perhaps they've just started, and they might have clients who are saying, I want my garden to be an organic garden, come along and do the certificate. If you're a really keen gardener already and you want to just make sure that your organic practices are up to scratch, come along and do the certificate. So that's what we're hoping, that it will really help people to garden in harmony with nature. So anyway, talking of all that, that's what you and I are going to be doing, a lot of gardening in harmony with nature this year. So Chris, let's just think about the veg patch for a minute. I know it's still a bit early, but what are you thinking about getting on with in terms of seed sowing this month?
I mean, this is an interesting time of year. If you look at social media, there's a lot of people, what is seed sow? I tend to be a bit more reserved about it. I want the longer days. I will sow some stuff. I kind of think this month, February, to me is very much in the preparations. There's a psychology for me when I get to February. I want to make sure everything is ordered in place. I know what I'm going to do. I'm quite organised all this. I might jig my allotment around again. I tend to sort of think about, obviously, my shed will get a brush out. I'll look at what seeds I've got, all those kind of things. Actually, I was up at HSL, Heritage Seed Libraries area this morning, up here at Ryton at Garden Organic, and you can see it's all like a coiled spring. Everything's been tidied, and the tunnels have been jet washed. It's all ready to go, it's organised and ready to go. And I kind of like this month for that feeling of anticipation. But saying that, I will sow a few bits and bobs. I've got some heated propagators with a bit of light on them. I've got a bit of light, so I'll put in my peppers, my chilies. I might do a bit of aubergine. I've already sown onions. They're up. So there are one or two things I can get going on, but I will kind of hold back till the end of the month before I really get going.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It is tempting to get stuck in, but I'm quite excited about potatoes though, because this is the time of year where if you look around, you can quite often find a potato day near you. There's one in Shropshire that I'm going to go to, which I'm really looking forward to. But if you have a little look around and see if you can find one, and it means you can go and get stuck in and find some organic potatoes, find some specialist varieties of potatoes, and get going with those. I mean, I think, to be honest, it is my very favourite thing to grow because it's always such a joy, isn't it, digging up potatoes?
Yeah, it is. They're another really good staple, aren't they? And I always sort of associate the very early spring of tatties and onions and, those sort of staples getting going. And of course you don't need a garden to grow tatties. You just need a Hessian sack. If you wanted to do it that way, or a big container. So yeah, and they're very good one to do with the kids because they are, there's quite instant results, only like 8-10 weeks where you get a crop. And they're a bit of fun. Yeah, so you can't beat a potato, that's for sure.
Right, so that's our veg taken care of for February. What about fruit?
Well, this is a busy time for fruit. Well, for apple and pear growing, this is a very busy time. Because this is where they all get their haircuts for the year, if you like. That's where they get their pruning. So I look after an orchard. It's quite a lot of trees. They're quite old, a lot of them. So when I do this time of year is I'm going to what I call spur prune. Okay. So I'm going to look at the last year's growth. You'll tend to find the shoots that are going to just produce leaves tend to be quite long, and tend to, the nodes, the growing points on the shoot tend to be further apart. So what I'm looking for is flowering wood that's going to flower. Once you've identified that, which the nodes tend to be closer together, it's quite distinct when you look closely. It's a hard thing to describe, without visuals, but I think you'll get it. You tend to look for the flowering wood, and that's going to be pruned back to 2 or 3 buds off the established branch. That's going to produce your flower in the spring, and that in turn will then produce your fruit. So remove the shoots that look like they're just going to produce leaves, prune back to the flowering buds. That's called spur pruning, and I'll be doing that in late February.
Okay. I mean, it was, of course, an absolutely amazing year for apples and pears last year. What do we think was behind that? What was the reason for that?
I think it was just quite warm in March, in the spring. We had quite a warm spring, quite a lot of moisture as well. And it was incredible fruit year, one of the best I've seen in all my time in the game. But I think spring plays quite a crucial role in it. If you get a March, early spring, and you get late frosts, that will affect the amount of fruit that sets, because obviously you get damage to the blossom. So it all depends on the temperatures, I think. This is an educated guess, I reckon. It all depends on the temperatures of what happens in the spring. That's quite fundamental, I reckon. And also good pruning techniques. If you're not pruning, what will happen is the plant will just put on more and more leafy growth. You'll get less and less flower. So that kind of spurring is aiming the growth at the stuff that's going to produce your apples or your pears.
Anything else we could be pruning at this time of year, Chris?
Yes, so I think pretty much, I mean, I've certainly, I've pruned back quite a lot of shrubs, things like spireas, things that flower on last year's growth, basically. So, like a lot of Weigelia stuff that produces its flower throughout the season, I'll cut back now. So, say a spirea, that flowers late summer. So that's flowering on the growth that was produced over the course of last year. So I've cut that back now hard. It produces new growth, and that's going to be my new flower. So time is quite important, okay? So if you think of summer flowering shrubs, cut back, okay? Spring flowering shrubs, you cut back after the flowers happened. So you'll just, whether it flowers on current season or last season is quite important. So that's one thing. Also on my basis, I've left all them on. I think I'll be now, as the shoots start to emerge, I'd probably be cutting those back as well, because you want that new growth to get the light and get a good, nice, strong start. I've got a grape. I've spur pruned my grape as well. So you again taking it back to 2 buds to a framework, and also good old wisteria. I'll spur prune that as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's really beginning to feel like summer when you're talking about wisteria. That's exciting. Very exciting indeed. Later on in the podcast, we'll be hearing from Harry at WildWater. Our head gardener, Emma O'Neill, did that interview. So really looking forward to listening to that. But my question to you is, obviously, as you know, I've got a pond. What do you think I should be thinking about in terms of the pond in February, or should I just let it be?
Well, you might want to, as the new season starts, you might want to cut back anything that's got too big or overgrown, that kind of, or lift and divide stuff before the season starts. I actually look after a pond, but it's got great crested newts in it. So I have a very limited window when I can do any work in it because apparently they come out of the pond and back in. So I think just a tidy up operation, maybe put some new plants in, maybe fish out anything, any weed that's proliferated, anything like that. So generally a tidy up, I think. And, I think Harry has a much more imaginative, look at it this time of year because obviously that's his speciality and he's incredibly good at it. But yeah, a tidy up, think about planting some new stuff, and you're off.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing what he's got to say because my pond has been such a joy, but I have run into a few problems with it. I do get quite a lot of blanket weed, and these things that I know everybody struggles with in gardens, and we don't have any fish in our pond. It's just plants. And I'm really lucky. I've got newts, and all sorts of other, wonderful, wildlife that comes to the pond, which is fantastic. But yeah, I'm worried about the blanket weed and a little bit. I had quite a lot of duckweed as well.
It's interesting because we had a really dry summer. The pond I had, they asked me to top it up. And of course, you're topping it up, not with rain, with a hose, basically. I was asked by the client to do it. It's interesting how those things have proliferated. The blanket weed has really came in because our tap water's full of nitrogen and, so you're feeding that weed really. So it's been, if you can make sure your pond fills with rainwater, you'll have a much more successful pond, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. But even last year, there came a point when we'd run out of rainwater to be able to top up the pond. And these are challenges, aren't they? This is the reality. In climate change, these are the things that we have to adapt, and accommodate towards. Of course, I've got a complete, proliferation of rainwater right now. I wish I had one of those mega tanks, but I don't, and nor do a lot of people. But yeah, it is all about collecting the water, slowing down the rainwater, trying to direct the rainwater into the pond, anyway, through various methods and where you site your pond in the first place and things like that. It's fascinating. I've absolutely loved having it and I've learned so much. So that's my garden. What's the bottom of your allotment looking like, Chris?
Yeah, it's looking okay. Cause I'm in that process of getting it all ready. And if people say to me, I always say I like to redesign my allotment this time of year. And they say we did that last year, but it's definitely part of my psychological preparation. It really is that cleaning the shed. So yeah, it's looking quite ordered. It's looking like it's ready to go, basically. I've got compost bins that are full. I've got 2 of them down there that are open compost bins, pallet bins that are ready to go. So I will be looking at the end of February to start using some of that focused on maybe on your any fruit tree, something like that. So definitely, any stuff I don't use, I'll give it a good old turn, ready for the temperature to start warming up to get all that microbe activity going and, make sure I've got a nice supply of our earthly gold.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the compost spreading, as it were, is better in the spring, isn't it? I mean, we talk sometimes about maybe is it an idea to put it on the autumn, but it actually kind of isn't. It's a bit of a waste to put it on in the autumn.
Well, the thing is, you just end up leaching the nutrient out in the rains and stuff. And, it makes sense if you've got something that's tender, if you're growing a tree fern, maybe something like that, because you help protect the surface roots. So that makes perfect sense. But if not, you want to be putting it on when the soil's starting to warm because the worms will pull it in quicker. The micronutrients will get at it. Microbacteria will get at it quicker. So you want it to be active when you put it down. And that's why I much prefer to mulch late February, early March, probably that sort of period.
And what are you most excited about, Chris?
Well, it'll always be seed sowing because I love that, every year, that idea that I can hold everything I grow in my hands in March and then what it turns into in my kitchen garden for my Goresfield client, for my allotment and for my balcony. It just turns into this incredible amount of plants that just provide all this colour, all this food. And I never get over that little miracle. I really don't. So yeah, without a doubt, seed is one of my most exciting parts of being a gardener.
Indeed. And me too. And this year is going to be the year. I promise you.
It is. It will. We'll be singing our praises come August. You wait.
A few weeks back, Garden Organics head gardener Emma O'Neill caught up with Harry Kelsey from WildWater while he was designing a new wildlife pond at the Garden Organic HQ in Ryton. Harry is an expert in creating and maintaining sustainable wildlife ponds, and he spoke with Emma about why ponds are such a valuable feature in organic gardens, how even small ponds can make a big difference for wildlife, and what to consider when creating one at home.
So, Harry, tell me all about WildWater.
I mean, I've been in the industry for, I'm trying to do the maths really quickly in my head, about 15 years now, I would say. I started in a garden centre. I worked in the aquatics department, the garden centre department, all across that, and got the bug for the outdoor job. That led me into a pond building job for a good friend of mine who I worked with at the time. So, and then I built ponds for many years with them. And eventually I decided I was ready to sort of set up WildWater alongside my wife, who helped me sort of build the business at the beginning and helps sort of run the background side of things still. I definitely felt my pull towards getting sort of more wild spaces into gardens. So we set up WildWater. At first we just focused on wildlife ponds, hence the name. And over time we're sort of expanding into wildlife gardens and meadows, hedging, anything that's really to sort of putting wild spaces back into people's gardens.
What is it that you loved about the wildlife pond?
I think as I was working around them more and more, and yeah, when you have a dragonfly land next to you, or you see some birds bathing in a pond, or you get a big spawn hatch and you've got tadpoles everywhere and you see kids excited. Yeah, there's so many factors that can go on around a pond. There's just so much that's drawn to them. It's the central point of wildlife in a garden. You get to see so much just come to it, and it really does draw it in. And I think seeing that as a product of our work is quite humbling in a way. And, you know, we've built ponds and year on year seen spawn grow. You know, we've had more and more sort of frog population grow from ponds and stuff like that. And knowing that garden went from sort of maybe there was a frog in a garden but moved on to now it's coming back to this pond, and you know, juveniles are coming back, and it's a population of some sort of wildlife is growing because of something we put in. That's a success story for us. So we love it. Yeah.
And why would you say that they are so valuable in UK gardens?
I just think they bring everything to a garden. The frogs, the birds, anything that comes to a garden that we enjoy seeing in the garden centrals around the watery element. Really, they come to the water because it offers the life that they need.
So in terms of organic gardening, that's great though, isn't it? Because it's bringing in that additional element of predators and biodiversity.
Yeah, I mean, it's a feeding ground, a spawning ground, a drinking ground. It's ticking all the boxes that everything needs, isn't it? Really? So it's a central point for everything.
And do you think that they can help with things like, you know, heavy rainfall? I know where we're building our pond currently, we have a lot of rain and a lot of flooding issues there and things like drought. And
there's definitely an opportunity for more water catchment. Droughts are an issue with ponds anyway because people want to keep them topped up, I guess. But there's opportunities to turn a simple water feature into more of a rain harvesting system, I guess. Mm-hmm. So that's something that's being explored more now as people are more aware of trying to capture what water we get, I guess.
And what do you think in general? Have you seen sort of an upsurge in ponds as habitats in the UK lately, or due to climate changes or more interest in biodiversity, or has it been pretty stable?
I think it's definitely been an upsurge since we set up our company 6-7 years ago. I mean, I worked in the industry before that, but since we set up WildWater, there's just been strength to strength of people wanting to put wildlife gardens and wildlife ponds in. It's more the garden extension as well as the pond. People are wanting to dedicate a corner to the wildlife again. Yeah. And that's really uplifting to see people that are thinking like that. That's definitely a change of mindset, I would say, within the gardening industry as a whole. When I worked in garden centres 15 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, I don't think that was really as much of a mentality compared to now.
And your ponds are still, is that right?
Predominantly, we advocate more for still ponds. We maybe do some moving ponds, some gentle streams and the like. If people want the sound of movement of water, we don't shy away from it. But
what do you think the benefits are then of having still, relatively still, and just allowing the movement with the wind and that sort of thing?
I think still ponds create, I wouldn't say, I mean, I think they are just as good as a moving pond, but they probably are better for stuff like newts and frogs. I mean, we generally see more spawning behaviour perhaps happen in a pond that's stiller and left to its devices. But equally, sometimes a flowing pond, maybe we see a little bit more bird life, like they like the movement of the water and bathing in the actual flow. So it depends what our customers are looking for is what we'll sometimes advocate for.
What do you think though about things like sort of blanket weed and duckweed, which I know people always write into us about, and sometimes people advocate that the water needs to be moving to help with that. What do you
That will
think
help.
about
I
that?
mean, you can get it's about balance, I think, with a pond generally, and that's sometimes a patient game. I have my own pond, and it's had its spike of duckweed from time to time. It's part and parcel of it, really. A little bit of duckweed I don't actually mind. If the balance shifts or there's any sort of a nutrient surge, then perhaps you might see that spike of, say, duckweed or blanketweed surge more. But it's finding the balance and trying to keep it. It takes years for a pond to find that balance, and then it's just as much of a mission to hold on to it, really. So keeping nutrient levels sort of lower and stopping any sort of nutrients running in from outside of the pond or building up on the inside of the pond.
I know we've certainly had our issues with blanket weed here, and I think that a lot of that is down to you maintaining it better.
Yeah.
We sometimes have left ours to its own devices.
And I think that especially for the first, maybe I would say 3 years, that establishment period is the period that we've generally find people do leave it to their own devices. It's probably the period that needs the most attention, monitoring, intervention when it's required, rather than sort of turning away and thinking job done. Nature will take on from here, because we are still, we're trying to replicate a natural feature. So it's a matter of trying to manage that replication, I guess. Some ponds that you see out in nature, actual natural sort of water features, have had centuries to potentially establish.
If we wanted to encourage more people themselves, sort of from scratch, what are the first things you think that they need to think about before they try and undertake digging a pond?
Location is always important. We don't want it too sunny. We don't want it too shady. We don't want it too hot or cold. Location is always important. Really managing the sort of fallout of autumn and the sort of where a lot of the nutrient tends to come from. So if you are going closer to trees, it can be okay, but we need to know how to manage what's coming. So, factoring in netting, stuff like that for a short period during autumn, fall is quite a good thing to consider as well. Depths, what you're digging into. Again, is it nice, good, easy digging clay, or is it gravelly soil that crumbles and falls very quickly? So
I suppose it's a bit similar to the right plant, right place.
Yeah, precisely.
Right pond, right place.
A pilot dig doesn't always hurt to do, maybe just to see what you're dealing with. We've dug into what we thought would be nice clay before, and I mean, probably one of the best things we ever found was an Anderson shelter, which you wouldn't want to build a pond on top of, so we had to move site. So location's quite a big factor, really.
What size would you recommend to make a meaningful ecological difference?
Arguably not, because I mean, we've worked on ponds down to 1.5 meters, and then we've worked on ponds over 20 meters. And sometimes the 1.5 meter ones we've seen, like you fill a bucket of frogs, they're just absolutely teeming. I think a body of water is always going to attract the life. It's the surrounding of that body of water that probably helps create more habitat and more refuge than anything else. If you have a tiny pond in the middle of a patio, it might not do as well as a tiny pond surrounded by log piles and longer grass and a corridor for stuff to move. There's more factors than just the size. So if you haven't got much space, that's fine. But it's working with the space that's sort of.
Yeah, that goes back to having it in the right place, doesn't it? In the right situation. And if you want a wildlife pond, you're best to have it surrounded by other elements that wildlife are going to use.
Precisely. And I think that's why we're more steering towards making people more think, and wildlife gardening as a phrase, I guess, is becoming stronger because it is that bigger mentality. It's what can we do with this corner or end or position in a garden that really is a haven.
Yeah. What time of year do you think is best to create a wildlife pond?
Bearing in mind what I spoke about with the establishment period, if you built a pond in early summer and then we have a summer like we've just had where it's been hot, dry, relentlessly, you're going to really ride a wave of sort of quite a harsh establishment, I would imagine. Autumn is always a good time to naturally build a pond, I think, and let the winter sort of let stuff settle in, let your plants settle in and everything else. But equally, you don't want to build a pond and then let it straight away fill up with leaves. So it's late autumn, early winter's a good time. But
And what about sort of depth variation? Do different depths work better for different species? I know we found some frogs, didn't we, today? But does it vary depending on how deep the pond is, or not necessarily?
I think obviously the bigger the pond, you're likely to maybe want some water lily coverage, so that will factor into the depth you're going to dig down to for the size of the water lilies. Quite often we see large ponds that weren't deep enough, and lilies are just sort of bulging out of the surface, they're exploding. Yeah. So that's usually down to the fact that they didn't maybe go down to sort of 3 or 4 foot rather than they've dug down to 2. But otherwise, I would say a lot of them sort of the insect action will actually happen in the warmer areas. So the marginal zones, it's arguably better to have a nice sort of 30 centimetre up to sort of 10 centimetre margin zone. That's twice as wide as most people ever expect to dig.
Right.
So everyone will do a narrow margin and a deep bowl and really widen the margin, and you're going to get a lot more action.
That's a good tip. I didn't know that. And are there common mistakes that you see people doing with site or shape of pond?
I think quite often, as we're seeing with yours, not to drop you in it.
Dare you.
But quite often the ground can shift over time, the lining shifts with it, so then we end up with exposed liner because sort of the levels of tilted water will always find its way to the lowest point. So a nice strong edge, however you see fit to do that. But that's quite a big thing. And then just good lining materials really. Plastic sheeting isn't the best lining. We see that fail mostly. So a good sort of rubber base line is always a good material to run with.
And obviously, and you yourself have one, gardeners sort of with young families, they often worry about having a pond, but they can be a real source of, entertainment and education, can't they? Sort of what tips would you have for a young family to, sort of mitigate what they might worry about? Yeah,
well, we've worked on a lot of ponds over the years for schools as well. So obviously a lot more children, but also for families. And that's where the sort of wildlife garden mindset, I think, is most important, because you can really create a corner that is a haven, but then also you can corner it off, you can fence it. So it can be somewhere that you enter together and you use together and you educate together, but it's always safe, rather than a pond in the middle of the garden that you're terrified of. So obviously it's a hazard. There's no doubt about it, but there's ways of making it into a piece in the garden, which I think it makes sense and is safe but usable.
Yeah.
And actually probably takes you into there more, and you go looking for your critters, and you go looking for frogs and turning over logs or stones and seeing what is going on in that corner. I think that's quite a nice.
Yeah, so it's better to do those things together, isn't it, and make it safe and have
I'd say so, and then it's exciting for the children as well, isn't it, to sort of go exploring in their own little world. I mean, they probably love the sort of wilderness corner. I know I would.
What about plants? So what do you think, what would your key essential plants be to make the pond as healthy as possible?
So I think your oxygenating weeds will be, we call them weeds, I don't know if that's the right word, your oxygenating plants, so hornworts, milfoils and the like, they're always a good plant. They're always sort of just a real good habitat, as well as a good engine for a pond. They do grow. I mean, obviously they're outgrowing other stuff, so it's again, it's the balance. So they could be managed, but it's better managing them than duckweed and blanket weed. You don't always need a water lily. It's quite good to shade a pond, I guess, especially depending on its location, but it's not a fundamental plant. I would say they are nice to look at, and if you can shade half of a sunny spot pond, then great. But
so if, for example, you had a garden that was just in full sun and you still wanted a pond, because obviously I know that's perhaps not the best, you would then perhaps use the water lily to mitigate some of that, to shade it.
It will help, I think in those kind of setups we would normally look to maybe shade sort of 60% of the central part of the body of water where the water lily will be. Again, our ponds are designed with those wider margins in mind, so there's a lot more shading eventually provided by the marginal planting. So that's important. But also,
so it wouldn't be a no-no if your garden was in full sun. There are ways around sort of providing.
There are. I think it's absolutely. And when we do them, it's not, it's just managing the growth, you expect a lot more surges, perhaps, maybe a little bit more evaporation. But then also just finishing up on the planting, the marginal stuff's also just as important, like some smaller ponds we see end up with flag iris in, stuff like that, which just overwhelm the pond too quickly.
Again, I feel that's a dig at
No, there's no
my
flag
ponds.
iris in there, is there?
In the other pond there is.
Oh, well, we've not got onto that one yet. But also one thing we are noticing appear more, and I think it's as a lot more housing developments get attenuation ponds and the like built into them, we're seeing a lot more reed mace or bulrush, as people commonly know them as. Sea drift gets everywhere, and they're landing in ponds, and they will damage a pond, they will damage a liner. So
is that a species you would consider that was quite invasive?
I would say it's damaging to a sort of man-made pond. Yeah, people put them in, people buy them off the rack. But I just would never, if I see them in a customer's pond, I'd take them out straight away.
Okay.
Yeah. They're just too damaging.
And are there any invasive species that you think we should avoid planting?
So that's probably one that I would sort of advocate for the most, is just avoiding anything that's a large rush. They're for lakes, canals, rivers, not for
small
garden ponds. Yeah.
What would be the first types of wildlife you typically see in a new pond?
We've actually had it within hours before, where a newts appeared from, it all depends on the garden. Sometimes it's already there. They just need the water to migrate to, but we very quickly get insects flying over. We did a pond in the summer and there was a dragonfly landing on a perch by the end of the build. All sorts of insect life will fly straight. Absolutely, yeah. A lot of pond life has wings, so it will find its way over pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Sometimes it'll even come in on your plants when you introduce your plants, snails and the like. So it will come very quickly. I think people are always most surprised by how quickly it appears.
And how long do you think it usually would take for a pond to establish to attract a lot of sort of beneficial wildlife into it?
Yeah, I think a well-built pond in a garden where there's already maybe some surrounding life, you'll see it in the first season start to appear. It'll establish itself. We'll start to get life cycles occur. Dragonflies will start to lay eggs and nymphs and stuff will appear. So I think in about 3 to 5 years, you'll really start to see quite a healthy ecosystem starting to show. And then it'll only go from strength to strength if it's managed well and kept in good shape, really.
So maintenance. Tell me, how is the pond care going to differ throughout the seasons in our UK climate? Should I be doing certain things at certain times of year, or can we just maintain it once a year, or what's the...
No, I think the biggest, I think we've kind of touched on it already, is that the biggest misconception is the management that a wildlife pond needs. I think it's generally people think leave it and it will naturally sort itself out, and it just needs some guidance. So managing any early algae blooms in the spring is always really important, not letting that sort of get a head start on you. Sometimes we find is a big problem. And obviously autumn debris, cutting back stuff before it's decaying, making sure leaves don't enter the pond before you're trying to remove them, because it's just easier avoidance rather than sort of managing what's already in. But yeah, management is important, and that's probably one of the biggest things we push on our customers is, to make sure we're looking after it in the right way. And then it thrives better. It generally does.
Yeah, because I think we have, with our large pond as well, as you were saying about the cutting back, we have a tendency to leave things thinking, that'll be better for the wildlife. But then obviously we get a lot of debris in the pond. And so really we perhaps need to be a bit more on it.
Yeah, I mean, windsor habitat's important. Some plants we'll leave if we know that they don't particularly decay, like sedges and rushes and the likes. We generally leave until the spring.
Oh, okay.
Because they generally hold their form. But stuff like irises, water lilies are especially quite rich when they break down. So it's important to really remove those leaves as they're decaying, each one. So there's certain plants which need more management than others to make sure that you're trying to keep that nutrient load out of the pond. Let it grow, let it pull that nutrient from the pond. And then as it starts to die off, get it away. Similar to like a meadow management in a way, like it's keeping that nutrient load sort of happy and balanced.
And you touched on this earlier about algae blooms, but is that a common sign that a pond is out of balance? So there are other things, and how do you fix that? You mentioned noticing it early on, but I don't think I would know what to do if I did get it.
In any new pond, you'll see quite an early algae bloom, I'd expect, because it's a balancing act. Naturally, we're not always sort of blessed to be able to fill them not from the tap. So that's usually a big factor that feeds your first bloom, is you'll get a nutrient come through with the tap water, naturally filtered, treated, or whatever else. It generally still causes that early bloom. You know, you're only just starting to get your microbial life into the mix. So everything's slow to get started. So just keeping an eye on what's going below the water can help catching that algae early. And then
if you've got it, how would you then treat it?
So yeah, I mean, snails are a good place to start. I think that generally they'll arrive on their own. There's a lovely snail that quite a lot of customers are fond of called a ram's horn. They don't generally appear as quickly, but they are sourceable from your local centres. They're a really good thing to add to help keep algae down.
You're not suggesting that we just chuck in our garden snails, are you?
No, so these are aquatic snails. They live in ponds, so you will see them. You'll see certain types called the giant pond snail, which is almost conical in shape. They'll appear. I guarantee they'll appear. They'll probably have snail eggs on the first pond plant you buy, and then they'll just grow and grow. So you should expect to see those appearing. But another sort of snail that is again aquatic and native is a ram's horn snail, which looks more like a sort of spiral shape. So people quite like them. They're quite
because aesthetically they look cute.
Yeah, they do, yeah. As cute as snails go, I guess. They're people are fond on them, so they can be bought in. That maybe won't appear as quickly, from my experience, but they can be bought in, and normally a garden centre can source those kind of things for you. And what you'll want to get those in quite early on, not too early because they will need something to eat. But once you start to see that sort of first emerald coating of algae on like your lining or your rocks or however your pond is, and you maybe start to get a little bit of a fur, then that'll be a good time to introduce some snails.
And that's what they're eating.
That's what they're eating, and that's what they'll get to work on. Whereas if you've already got a tremendous blanket weed bloom, they'll eat it, but they're not gonna knock that back. They're not super pure. So again, it's proactive approach, I guess, to the management side of it all. So I think it's always just keeping an eye on the pond and
so a lot of observation.
Yeah, I'd say so. More than most people.
Going on.
More than most people appreciate, I think, is just keep an eye on the pond.
It's like gardening. I didn't expect that it was. I would have to do so much work.
This is it.
And finally, do you think that gardeners should ever clean out the pond fully? And if so, why? And how often would you recommend that?
I think sometimes it becomes, at least a partial clean it becomes a necessity if sludge layers become anaerobic, so that, they've been allowed to build up to the point where they're actually trapping in methane and kind of creating a low oxygen environment.
How would you be able to tell?
If you drag the net through the bottom of a pond and manage to pull up a load of sludge and it really smelled quite rotten, it didn't smell. I mean, it'll all be a bit smelly, don't get me wrong, it's ponds. It's a smelly job. But I think if it really smells quite rotten and like it's decaying, then that's usually a sign that it's getting a bit anaerobic. That's a telltale sign that things are shifting the other way. So sometimes that's where maybe, not always a pond clean, like quite often we do a lot of servicing or deep servicing where we'll use vacuum equipment and just reduce it, just try and get that sludge layer.
Okay.
So we're not actually because there's a lot of hell still in the water. There's a lot of stuff we can't see, microscopic, that's in that water. So to just dump that water, clear the pond out, polish it all up nice and put the water back in fresh is usually more detrimental than good. So if we can store the water and empty it and clean the pond out, then that can be helpful. But if we haven't got the capacity to do that, then trying to take it out in bits and dribs and drabs can help as well. Or find a nice, friendly local pond contractor. Shameless plug.
Well, thank you for joining me this afternoon, Harry. That's been fascinating. And now you've given me more work to do. So I hope the one you're helping me with is going to be perfect.
Yeah, I look forward to getting it finished for you.
Well, here we all are to answer your questions. The first question and answer session of 2026. So I'm here with Anton Rosenfeld and Chris Collins. Hello to both of you.
Hi, Fiona.
Hi, Fiona.
The very first question is, brilliant for us because it's all about comfrey. And in fact, it's about comfrey tea, which is not something you can drink, but something your plants will love. So here's the question. I've just been reading Teeming with Microbes. There's a chapter on compost teas where the focus is on keeping the liquid aerated at all times. The authors regard anaerobic soup, such as I regularly make with comfrey, to be unsafe and to be avoided. They argue that the smell is an indicator that the liquid should not be used. Does Garden Organic have a view on this topic? And that question is from David. Thank you, David. It's a great question. Well, first of all, let's just go back to basics. Chris, what's a compost tea?
Well, I would probably, Fiona, prefer to call this a liquid feed. So it's basically we're taking our comfrey leaves, mixing them with water to dilute them, and then getting them, and then hoping the water then takes the nutrients out of the leaves into the liquid. So you'll put the leaves in, add the water, leave it for a certain amount of time, and then that ferments, that gets fermented, and then you'll drain that off, dilute it into a watering can, and water it onto your plants. So it's an additional fertilizer in a way. The only downside with it, I would say, is it rather stinky. So that's probably where you can see the reference in the question there, that you do tend to get quite a strong smell off it. So the case it may be is you have to try and make it anaerobic, make sure it isn't smelling, and make it a bit cleaner.
Okay, all right. So, Anton, let's dig a bit into the science here. So what do they mean by anaerobic soup?
So there are two ways of making a compost tea. When they say anaerobic, that means that there's no oxygen in there. Sometimes it's also called fermented. And when they refer to an anaerobic soup, they mean that the comfrey has been basically fermenting in there with no oxygen at all. And generally, when things are broken down without any oxygen, the bugs, because they don't have any oxygen, they have to find some other chemical process. And usually that chemical process ends up being quite smelly. It might end up generating sort of sulfurous smells. It might generate vinegar, which has got a specific sort of smell to it, or it might generate alcohol as well, which again is a very sort of specific type of fermentation. So when you exclude oxygen, you get what's called an anaerobic process.
Okay, so does that mean it's unsafe? Because David is asking that question, I guess, that he's read that it should be avoided, that we shouldn't be using it, that it's unsafe. What would you say to that?
That's a very good question. I guess perhaps you might think it's unsafe just because of the smell of it as well. It really does have a terrible smell to it. But with comfrey liquids, when things have been fermented, it can sometimes encourage more of the bugs such as E. coli to be prevalent. And obviously, E. coli is not good for humans, but it's not going to do any harm to your plants. So basically, you really want to avoid drinking the comfrey tea. I don't think anyone in their right mind would ever drink it just because of the smell of it. And also you'd want to make sure that you washed your hands really carefully afterwards as well. But it's not going to cause any harm to the plants. You're not going to get sort of plant pathogens appearing in there.
So in this book, Teeming with Microbes, they talk about aerating the liquid. Why would they suggest that?
So if you're to aerate the liquid, people quite often do this when they're making compost teas, and they actually use a very sort of simple pump like you'd use in a fish tank. You know, you can get them for about 10 or 20 quid. And so that bubbles oxygen through the liquid. And that basically means you get a different sort of makeup to the bugs that appear in there. You get more sort of bugs which survive under aerobic conditions. That's conditions with oxygen. And usually this means that what we call the good bugs will sort of proliferate a lot more quickly. So these will be bugs which will be useful in your soil when you add the liquid to your soil. So what some of these bugs will do is they'll help break down substances into nutrients that the plants can use. And also quite a lot of these bugs also very good at competing against sort of bacterial and fungal diseases in the soil as well. So basically, if you've got a lot of good bugs already there, then the bad bugs don't get a look in.
So are we advising people to aerate their comfrey feed or to not aerate their comfrey feed? What's our view?
So there are definitely some benefits to aerating it. Obviously, it's quite a lot of extra work. You have to get yourself a sort of fish tank pump or pond pump. So it's quite a bit more work to aerate it, but there are some benefits. Having said that, if you don't aerate your comfrey liquid, there's no harm in that. You'll mainly be just adding nutrients to your soil. You won't be adding so many sort of beneficial bugs. So there is an extra benefit from aerating it, but it's quite a bit of extra work.
Okay, Chris, to aerate or not to aerate?
I like the idea of, because you could get a little solar panel, couldn't you? And then I put that, I suppose you need quite a large container to do it, and then an open container, and then with a little solar panel you could put a bubbler in. I probably think my time is a bit too short to do that, to be honest with you. So I'll have to stick to the stinky method.
Okay. I do want to ask you, what do you use your comfrey feed for? Let's just remind ourselves what it's great for.
So comfrey liquid is pretty rich in nitrogen and potash as well. It's particularly good for things which are fruiting. So, I mean, it's a really good tomato feed. It really works well there. If you've made it in a great big barrel, then actually it's quite dilute already, so you can use it undiluted. If you've happened to have made it in a drain pipe where it's all compressed in a thick black liquid, then you will need to dilute it a bit. You'll need to dilute it about 1 in 10. There was some work done by Lawrence Hills, it's in his Comfrey book, which basically showed that the comfrey liquid had exactly the same sort of nutrient content as a proprietary tomato feed. So it is good stuff.
Excellent. And of course, if you use the drain pipe method, let's just quickly explain that.
So you can, in a smaller space, Fiona, you can do our compression method of comfrey, which is you actually add it to the corner of your compost bin. You put your comfrey leaves in it, then you use a heavy weight to compress it down, and the moisture then drips out into a container below. You then can use that as your feed. It's a very effective way for a small area, and you can see it on our website. I encourage people to go and have a look.
Yep, the drain pipe method. It's brilliant. Okay, let's stick with being outside and thinking about our compost areas and our feeding and looking after the soil. We've got a really interesting query here around composting during the winter. So Wynne has written in and said, my local authority doesn't take kitchen waste and isn't planning on doing so for a few years. I have a compost tumbler which is now full of vegetable peelings. No food or eggshells. During the winter, the tumbler does not break down quickly enough and I'm left with a surplus of peelings. Is there a method to compost these without leaving on an open compost heap that might attract rats, etc.? Good question. Anton, first of all, it's a bit surprising that the local authority doesn't accept kitchen waste, isn't it?
Yeah, so from the end of March onwards, every household should have a food waste collection from their house. There are a few exceptions. Apparently, a few local authorities have got themselves into specific contracts, which has made it more difficult for this act to come into place. So you just need to basically look into what your local authority is doing. But the majority of local authorities should be collecting your food waste for you.
Okay. Of course, even if you've got a food waste collection, we would encourage you to keep composting. A tumbler, for anyone who doesn't know what that is what it sounds like. It's a compost bin that's kind of put on an apparatus and it's got a handle and you can turn all the compost by turning the handle, and it stays within the compost bin. So it's kind of a closed system. But it's interesting to hear that Wynne is struggling with her veg peelings not breaking down during the winter. I think there's probably a number of strategies that she can deploy. But Chris, where would you start with this?
So I think no matter what sort of compost bin you're using, sealed or unsealed or open, you still need to apply the 50-50 rule. And that's carbons and nitrogens. So I'd maybe use the tumbler as a stopgap between that and the final compost bin. So if you've got your potato peelings in the tumbler, and you've got a pile of brown waste, that could be leaves, it could be paper, mix the two together and mix them up, and that will accelerate the compost process. You'll get the right sort of microbacteria working. As far as winter goes, it's going to be slow anyway. Everything slows down. The microbacteria activity slows right down. in the soil. That's why your grass stops growing under 5 degrees. Everything slows down. So I wouldn't really worry about that too much. I'd be prepared for maybe kicking it off late winter, early spring by turning it, and that will accelerate. So it will break down a little bit, but don't be too disappointed if it doesn't break down too quickly.
Okay, what is it that you do in the winter, Anton, with your compost?
So yeah, I think Chris has sort of pointed out you can end up with too much green material if you're just putting your sort of food waste in your compost bin, like your veg peelings and stuff. So you need to have a source of browns. I actually do this with a sort of ready-made system. I just have a small compost sort of caddy in my kitchen, but I've lined it with a thick layer of newspaper. So as soon as it's full, I just basically wrap the whole lot up in the newspaper, and then I stick that in my compost bin. So I've got my greens and browns already ready-made. I don't have to think about it, because when you're going to a compost bin in your duck, you don't really want to have to think too much.
No, absolutely. And it makes a nice kind of neat little package that you can carry out and put out there. I do the same for my wormery. I wrap it up in newspaper and hand it over to my worms as a lovely kind of prepackaged meal for them. There are a number of different methods that we can all be using for composting our kitchen waste during the winter. I've got bokashi bins, a small bin that just sits in the kitchen, and you put any food in it, and then you add the bokashi bran in layers, and it ferments, and then you leave it for another week or so. And then it's ready to just put into the compost at that point, and it doesn't attract rats. That's been a real help during the winter for me, particularly over the Christmas period, actually, when we had loads of people in the house and lots of sort of food waste that we were processing. I think you can deploy a number of methods, can't you, Chris?
Yes, you can. I think, and again, you're just sticking to that one rule, and that what method you do, you want to make sure you get the combination right of carbon and nitrogen, as it's true. So yeah, wormery's a good idea. Obviously your kitchen idea, bokashi sounds brilliant. I might even try that myself. I don't do that currently at the moment, but yeah, so you've got a lot of options, but just remember it's going to be slower in the colder months. That's life. We all are, I think. And then, make sure you get your browns and your greens nicely mixed together.
On now to a question all about fruit trees sent in by Jonathan. I have mature apples and pears grown as cordons and espaliers, which form a hedge between my drive and the lawn. They sit in a bed about 1 metre wide, which needs continuous attention throughout the growing season to keep it weed free, and I'd like to reduce the effort that this requires. Okay, so we can imagine this, can't we? You've got a kind of a bed down the one side of the lawn. You've got the driveway on the other side. You want to do something underneath that extraordinary kind of row of cordons and espaliers. I must say I'm very envious. That sounds wonderful. Let's just explain first of all what cordons and espaliers are. Chris, can you just give us a quick rundown on that?
Sure, yeah. Basically, they're all pruned into a framework. So an espalier would be a main stem, and then you'd have lateral side branches coming off, maybe 4 or 6 of them. And you develop that framework, and what happens is every winter, say late February, I tend to do mine, you cut them back to 2 or 3 buds to get them to flower on that main frame. A cordon really this looks like a spear. It's literally one stem, usually planted at an angle, and it really is a massively space-saving way to grow fruit. You see them in the fields, the orchards of Kent, and you prune back every late February to get those fruiting spurs. It's a very space-effective method of growing fruit.
Mm. And this question is about underplanting, and what's great about this, Jonathan, is you don't want bare soil, and we're all, delighted with that because that's absolutely essential. You don't want bare soil underneath there. But Chris, I think you might have some information from your days at Westminster Abbey about fruit trees and underplanting of fruit trees.
Yeah, well, I was looking, because it's like 9 centuries old, this garden. I was looking at and originally it was run by monks. So it actually is a place where people got ill, they would go. I wanted to see what it would look like in its original days. It wasn't easy to do, but I think traditionally orchards would have been underplanted with wildflower. And that was what was happening at Westminster Abbey. And if you think about it, that makes sense. Because you've got wildflower or meadow mix, basically. A meadow mix, which could be a mixture of gramineae grasses and flowers. If you've got that, you're going to bring the pollinators in. You'll get predators in, so you'll keep the death, pest and disease down in the orchard. So they were well ahead of us, I think, in many ways. I'm quite interested, maybe Anton might be able to say what kind of species you think you'd find in that meadow mix like that.
Well, yeah, I guess one of the things, you don't want something that's too competitive against the trees. So you'd want a grass which is lower growing. So you say like a fescue or a bent. Also might like have some leguminous flowers. So, white clover's a good one that will attract lots of bees, and it's quite low growing as well. Trefoils are quite nice birds, but trefoil will attract quite a few bees as well. And then sort of other things like sort of cornflowers, in there. And basically these are all things that could be mown as well. So, every so often you can, when it's getting a bit too tall, you can mow it back to stop it competing against the trees. And also that helps to keep the weeds down as well. And the mowings, basically that will be returning the nutrients to the soil and helping to feed the trees. So, it sort of works in all ways, really. You've got the things to attract the pollinators, looks nice, and also it's feeding the soil and the trees.
Sounds perfect, doesn't it, really?
So if you don't want to mow under those trees, what about food that you could grow under trees? Any thoughts around that, Chris?
I've done food under fruit trees on a smaller scale. So those of you with a smaller garden or even a balcony, is I have a dwarf apple and I actually grow strawberries underneath it. And it's very productive as well, because obviously the tree's deciduous, so the light gets in during the early springtime, the plant puts on growth and it sets fruit. So that's one idea. I don't know what the size of this border. You might need a lot of strawberry plants to fill the whole thing. I don't know. But it's good to say you could do it with strawberries. But yeah, obviously you could actually do it with herbs. One of your favourite types of plant, Fiona. You could actually underplant with herbs. Again, we're coming back to that scenario where we don't want to see bare soil. I love soil. It's my favourite thing, but I don't want to see it in the garden. So a nice bit of ground cover of strawberries or herbs would be a great idea.
That's right. So plenty of ideas there for you, Jonathan. I hope you get on well with that bed this year. Thanks for all of those questions this month, and do please write to us if you've got other questions that we can answer in future podcasts. Lovely to see you both. See you next month.
Cheers, Fiona.
Cheers, Fiona.
Thanks so much to Anton and Chris for joining me on the Organic Gardening Podcast, and to our head gardener, Emma O'Neill, and Harry Kelsey from WildWater. If you've enjoyed listening, please recommend us to a friend or leave us a review on your preferred podcast app. Do come back again next month as we get ready for a great year of organic growing. If you want to find out more about Garden Organic and what we do, why not visit our website at gardenorganic.org.uk. All that's left for me to do is to thank Kevin MacLeod for the music, and we'll see you next time.